Support for this podcast comes from listeners like you. This is an ad-free show and donations are greatly appreciated. To learn more and make a contribution, go to authenticparenting.com/support. Thank you for your generous and kind support. It means the world to me. I am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the generational cycle of trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, how to meet your children's needs without neglecting your own. Powerful conversation, a deep dive into the nuanced, complicated, and somewhat elusive world of the needs. We all have needs. Our children have needs, and so do we. The question is, how can we parent in such a way that everyone's needs are seen, understood, and met? Is it even possible? Tune into this fantastic conversation with a returning guest, a fellow podcaster, and a dear friend, Jen Lumanlan. She's the host of the Your Parenting Mojo podcast, and she has written a trailblazing book called Parenting Beyond Power: How to Use Connection and Collaboration to Transform Your Family and the World. I am positive that after this episode, you're going to feel empowered, inspired, and equipped with knowledge and practical tools in honoring and meeting everyone's needs. Jen is one of those people, one of those friends who I don't talk to very often, but when I do, I realize how much I like them and I need to spend more time with them. I will have links to her previous episodes in the show notes and to her book, which I highly recommend. I hope you will find it helpful. Please enjoy. Jen, welcome to the podcast again. I am delighted to have you back.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, and I love our conversations, even though it's not frequent, but I feel like I know you since you are a podcaster and I listen to your podcast quite often, and it feels like I know you and I'm connected to you more often, but in reality, we only met several times.
Yeah, strange thing about podcasting, isn't it?
I know. People know about us more than we think they do. Speaking of podcasting, last time when we spoke, you said to me that you were writing a book, and this book is coming into the world very soon. So congratulations, number one. How do you feel about this debut?
Getting excited. I think it's a combination of excited and scary. It's always scary to put what I think are some pretty big ideas out into the world and see what the reaction is. And also very excited to have conversations with people about them.
Yeah, I think the podcasting is that safer way of putting ideas and exposing ourselves to the world. And when you put out the book, I think maybe we had this prep time, before the Olympics. I feel like podcasting at least helped me to overcome a lot of my own limitations, challenges, dealing with imperfection and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the most challenging part about the book is that you have to call it done. You can't go back and record another episode and say, yeah, I learned something new and I want to share that with you too. It's just done.
Yes, I can see that. So when you first shared your book idea with me, obviously I sort of knew what you were talking about, but I didn't know. And having skimmed through your book, I know now what you meant back then. But I was looking at the reviews of your podcast, and there is one I want to, unfortunately, start this conversation with the somewhat of a negative review, but it goes with my question. So this person said, I first started listening to this podcast because it offered actionable and evidence-based parenting advice. Since then, it's evolved into commentary on systemic problems from a social justice angle. If that's your thing, Great. But if you're using this as a parenting guide, you're going to be teaching your kids a victimhood mindset. And then it goes on into, it would be helpful if you can give me, practical advice and that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of people, when they first hear the idea of your book, maybe just like this person, they may not understand how can those social justice ideas and parenting come together? Where do they merge? So let's start with that.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, I thought you were going to quote the one. There's one that I remember about, I want the unbiased scientific evidence. I don't want the layering of the social justice issues on the top. And to me, that sort of fundamentally misunderstands what scientific research is, right? Because science kind of conveys to us that it has this veneer of objectivity, that a scientist can remove themselves from the picture and tell us what's actually happening with no bias whatsoever. But of course, there's bias baked into every step of the research process. And so I think that connects to your question on, how is the social justice issues related to parenting? And to me, it took me a long time to figure this out. And I figured it out eventually because I had stumbled on a podcast. It was called How to Get Away with Parenting by a Black podcaster who's actually local to me in the Bay Area, and we're now friends. And in that podcast, she said one time that a Black parent of a Black child can't walk into a grocery store with their own snack because someone might think they stole it. And that the parents of a Black toddler might feel afraid that toddler would have a meltdown in a public place because there's nothing less safe to white people than an out of control Black boy. And it sort of cast my mind back to a time when I dropped Karis, my daughter, off at preschool. She was probably, 3 at the time. An hour later, the preschool calls me and says she has an ear infection. I pick her up. She's in full on meltdown. I drive to CVS. She's like sprawled out in the floor in the painkiller aisle. And I'm ripping open a box of Tylenol, trying to get a dose of Tylenol into her. And I've stuffs all over the place. And I had zero fear for my safety. And I hadn't paid for this Tylenol that we were consuming. And so when I put these things together, I was like, oh, I have white privilege as a parent, and I had no idea. And so that was sort of the beginning of my awakening on these issues. And of course, it speaks to my privilege that I never had to consider these things before and that I didn't even know that it was there. And so I was exploring issues related to race on the podcast. I did this in a really open way. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to go out and find researchers who can help me understand this. So I did that. I started looking at patriarchy and at capitalism. And at the same time, I have a membership for parents, and the parents in there are asking me questions like, how do I get my kid out the door in the morning? How do I get them to get dressed? How do I get them in the bath? How do I get them to stay in bed? And it was like there were these two parallel paths of the huge ideas I was exploring related to cultural issues on the podcast and their daily struggles that parents were having. And eventually I realized that these are not two parallel paths. These are intimately connected, and that the ways that we interact with our children on a daily basis shape how they will go out into the world and treat others. And so if we are, giving them all the right messages around issues related to race that fit with our values, right? We're telling them these lessons, but then we are using our power over them to get them to do what we want them to do because it seems like there's no other option. Then, anyone who's ever sworn in front of their kids knows that if you tell your kid not to swear and then you swear in front of them, your kid is gonna swear. So they learn from what we do more than from what we say. And what I realized was that the family, that these interactions that we're having with our children are how these cultural ideas are transmitted to the next generation. Of course, other media and things out in the wider world as well that our kids are exposed to. But the primary site of transmission of these cultural ideas is in the family. And so if we hold values related to treating everyone with respect and with care, and we are using our power over our children, then the things that we're doing with our children are not well aligned with our beliefs about how the world should work. And the more that we can bring those into alignment, the better we're going to feel because it feels good to be acting in alignment with our values. And also, frankly, the less our kids resist us, because our kids see us trying to use our power over them, and they hate it just like we hated it. We resisted it until we were trained not to, and they resist it and they push back. So when we can do that less, we see less of that resistance, and everything else gets less frustrating in parenting.
Yeah, you write, I think, in the introduction of your book, for a long time, I didn't see the connections between things that were happening in my home and broader cultural forces. So you also felt that connection, like you had this illumination, I guess. And then you talk about your childhood and how you grew up, what was allowed, what was not. For somehow, like, I really want to dig into that part. I also want to talk about your autism, you were diagnosed in your adulthood. But I think I want to keep it to something specific. Maybe I can have you back again and explore your childhood and all of those things. Of course, that's very interesting to me, but I think I want to make this more relevant to the parent. You talk about our children's resistance being a gift. So let's start with that. How is that? How can someone shift their perspective and see that as a gift? And what's this gift that we're unwrapping?
Yeah, on first blush, it doesn't look like much of a gift, does it? It doesn't feel like much of a gift. And the gift that it really is that our children's resistance is a signpost to their needs. And when our children's needs are met on a more regular basis, then they stop resisting. And so, this happened to us when we were children as well. We pushed back against the things that our parents wanted us to do that didn't meet our needs. And through this process that we call socialization, our parents trained us to stop doing that. And the three main sort of social forces that I talk about in the book are white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism. And they're obviously super big ideas. I'm not the first to sort of put them together. Bell Hooks talked a lot about that and how the three of them are interconnected. And basically, our parents looked out into this world and either sort of implicitly or explicitly realized that the world is being run by these social forces. And they looked at us and they said, you are not going to do well in this world the way that you're showing up right now, right? You are too big, you're too much, you're too loud, you're too everything. And so you need to stop doing all of those things. You better put all of those needs in a box and pretend that they don't exist anymore. Because firstly, they're hard for me to cope with as your parent. And secondly, you're not going to do well in the world if you go out as your whole self right now. And so they trained us to stop paying attention to our needs. And then when we were able to do that successfully, they rewarded us with belonging in our family, right? We were shamed for showing those feelings, and we were rewarded when we didn't show them by suppressing our needs. And then they would love us and they would communicate their love to us. So we used to resist, and our children, our young children, especially the toddlers, the preschoolers, haven't yet learned that lesson of stuff your needs down in a box. And so they resist when we ask them to do things that doesn't meet their needs. And one thing I want to be really clear about is what I am not saying is that, oh my goodness, this is all about my child's needs and I should meet my child's needs all of the time and they are the most important thing, right? A lot of parenting advice kind of assumes that the parent's only role is to be the provider of the quote unquote correct environment for their child to do well. And the parent has no other purpose than that. And what I'm saying is, you, parent, have just as many needs as your child does, and you have just as much of a right to have your needs met as your child does. And so when we can see that child's resistance and think underneath that, what is that trying to tell me? Right? There's a saying in respectful parenting circles at the moment, all behavior is communication. All behavior is communication of what is the real question. And so I actually put a quiz together, and listeners can find that at yourparentingmojo.com/quiz. And you can answer some 10 basic questions about your child's behavior, and it will point you towards what is likely to be one of your child's most overriding needs. And it's probably something like connection, right? Autonomy. I want to be able to make decisions that feel really important to me. And those are two very, very common ones, particularly in the toddler years. And when we can meet our child's need for connection in the way that they want to receive it, which may look very different from how we offer connection, when we offer them autonomy over things that they perceive to be really important, they stop resisting us. And then our needs for peace, for ease, for harmony, for collaboration get met as well.
Yes, all of this is wonderful. And I agree, of course, with you. But I think for a parent who was raised in ways that needs were not recognized, we were shamed or, punished for having needs and wants, we're so disconnected from our needs. I think it becomes very difficult to discern, to know. It can become very overwhelming. You have to discern your child's needs, then your own needs, meet your child's. Where is the balance? Oh, it's all way too much, right? It can become too much. There's a big learning curve that has to happen. How do you recommend someone start working with this? Is it easier to learn to identify your child's needs? And is it a parallel work? Is it first you do your own needs work, then, try to connect to your child's? I'm curious, what have you maybe personally found useful in your own parenting? And from the membership that you run, what comes up in this department?
Yeah. So I think one really critical idea that I took on and that helped me to find a path forward was the difference between needs and strategies to meet needs. And so anyone who's familiar with nonviolent communication knows the sort of basic setup of that. And so, a connection is a need. Collaboration is a need. Getting my child to listen to me is not a need, right? And I often come back to an example of a time when I got really fed up with my husband because he never unloaded the dishwasher in the mornings. I would get up, I would make my breakfast, I would unload the dishwasher, and I'm kind of doing it while the oatmeal's heating up. So I know it only takes 3 minutes because that's the amount of time on the microwave. It's not an onerous task, but I'm just getting sick of unloading the dishwasher every day. And he kind of swans out of bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock and makes his coffee, which takes 20 minutes. And, he's taking a leisurely morning and I've already gotten our daughter breakfast, done 2 hours of work. And so, I have this story going on in my head about he doesn't care about me. He doesn't see all the work that I'm doing. He doesn't respect the work that I'm doing. And he's lazy, right? And so I pick a fight with him over the dishwasher. I latch on to this strategy of the way that you can show me that you care about me is to unload the dishwasher. And of course, afterwards, I was able to regroup and see this is not about the dishwasher, right? There's a list of needs in the book that I think can help parents to sort of look through and, oh, yeah, that's what I'm really needing. And when you look at that list, there's nothing about dishwashers on there. But what there is things like collaboration, right? I wanted to feel like I was on the same team as my husband, and that was missing for me. And one of the ways that he could help me with that to meet that need is to unload the dishwasher at a different time, maybe. Also, there are probably 50 other ways he can help me to meet my need for collaboration that have nothing to do with the dishwasher. He could take our daughter out so I can have some undisturbed work time. He could do more of the grocery shopping. He could do more of the cooking, right? All of those help me to meet that need for collaboration. And so when we can see that the thing we're asking our child to do is not a need, right? I need to get out the door. I need you to stay in bed. That's not really a need. My need is for peace and harmony and ease and maybe competence in my work in the morning, right? My needs are for really sort of fundamental attributes of what it means to be human to be met, not for you to do a specific thing. So making that distinction, I think, is super, super important. And where I would start looking for that, I think where I've seen parents have the most success in understanding their own needs, which, remember, we used to know what they were until we were trained to forget about them. And so I work with parents who say to me, before I met you, I had no idea that I even had needs, never mind what they were. And so where I advise parents to start looking is, where do you feel frustrated? Where do you feel angry? Can be a difficult one for people who are socialized female, right? Because anger is, in a patriarchal society, is not okay for women to express. So frustration, anger, resentment. Anywhere you're feeling frustration, anger, resentment is a really good sign that you have unmet needs. And you can kind of look at that situation, look at a needs list, and try to think to yourself, okay, what's really going on here? It's not that I need the dishwasher unloaded, it's that I need collaboration. So that's where I would start.
Yeah. And also, I want to add something else, that the dishwasher strategy, for you, it's a need for collaboration. For someone else, maybe a different need.
For sure.
Or you may have two needs or multiple needs at the same time. I want the listener to know that oftentimes we do have multiple needs at the same time. Yes, we're trying to pinpoint what need is percolating underneath this strategy. But sometimes, for Jen, it's maybe a need for collaboration. For another person, maybe it's a need for order. Maybe it's a different kind of need. So that's number one. And I really want to highlight, where are you feeling frustrated, resentful, and angry? To look at those nuts, in your relationships, and ask a question, perhaps, like, what's important here? Why am I feeling this way? Like, dig down and down and down to get to the bare need, because oftentimes it could be very hard. People might say, I'm feeling resentful. Well, because my husband doesn't unload the dishwasher. It goes back to the strategy. But why is this important, Jen? Unloading the dishwasher, what that might give you? Right? These are questions that we can ask to help someone to uncover their needs. That's what I want to ask you to maybe elaborate on this a little more, if possible.
Yeah, I think the idea of different people having different needs, like even somebody else having a dishwasher issue with their partner, maybe looking to meet different needs. And the critical thing about that is, when you understand what need you're trying to meet, then you can find strategies to meet your need, right? So if my need is for collaboration, then taking my daughter out and doing more of the grocery shopping is something that actually helps me. It helps to meet my need. If, as you say, somebody else's need is for order, then those strategies are not necessarily going to be helpful. So this is why understanding the need is critical. And if we sort of take it back again to a parent-child interaction, I work with so many parents who say, I have tried everything. I have tried all of the gentle parenting tools, and none of them work. And the reason for that is because whatever you are telling your child, whatever you're asking your child to do, is still not understanding or helping them to meet their need. And when we can truly understand what that need is, we can help them to meet it, right? So I was in a workshop with a parent who had the same fight with her, I want to say 6-year-old daughter every morning. Get dressed. No. Get dressed. No. Why don't you want to get dressed? She asked one morning after countless times of this fight happening over and over again. And, why don't you want to get dressed is sort of trying to get at what is your need in a way that a child can actually answer. Because if you say, what is your need? The child's probably going to say, I don't know, what's a need? And so the child said, I like knowing you were the last person to touch my clothes in the morning before I get dressed. Need for connection, right? And of course, the parent is willing to help meet that need. And so the parent hugs the child's clothes, the child puts them on, and there's no more resistance anymore because the child's need is met. The parent's need for peace and order and harmony and ease in the morning is met. And we're able to move through our morning in a way that feels good to everybody. And so if there was a different reason, right? My daughter went through a phase of not wanting to get dressed because she didn't want to be cold in the morning. So hugging the clothes doesn't work, quote unquote, for that child. So when we're just throwing these strategies at the wall and trying to see what will stick, if we haven't identified the need, chances are it's not going to address the need. Because hugging my daughter's clothes, she'd be like, why are you doing that? Whereas getting dressed in front of the heater helps her to meet her need for comfort, right? Different need, different strategy to address the need.
Absolutely. And we have to do this constantly, this work of, I think in the beginning, it's hard. I don't want someone listening to this and saying, oh my gosh, this is so much work, so much thinking, so much figuring out. It's exhausting. This gentle parenting is already exhausting. Just parenting is very stressful. Now I have to identify the needs. But I personally know that, and I teach the needs too. This is a foundational thing for my work with parents. But once you start using this lens, things shift almost immediately. You may not recognize the need exactly, but because you're coming from this perspective, that already shifts the whole dynamic. You're not into punishment, reward, control, fear-based domain anymore. And then after that, it does take some learning curve and time, and you may not succeed right away identifying your child's needs. But I think the closer you get in this guessing game in the beginning and read and learn and practice, it becomes second nature. It does. It's like, wow, there aren't that many needs our youngsters have. As adults, we do have more nuanced and complex needs. I have a need for service, connection, meaning, and purpose. My 3-year-old doesn't have those needs. They have strong need for autonomy, strong need for connection, acceptance, and those kinds of things. And I really want to talk about now about the cupcake needs.
I was hoping you were going there.
Yes. Yes. So please talk to me about this yummy description. What's the cupcake of needs?
Yeah, the cupcake was a late entry into the book. It was that I was looking for a visual way of representing the idea that we're very often trying to meet the same needs over and over again. And so I do think that parents, look at a needs list in the back of the book, or you can find them online and think, well, how am I supposed to know what my need is, what my child's need is? And I see this when I work through scenarios with parents, with teachers. We start to see the same needs coming up over and over and over again. And so the cupcake is kind of a visual way of showing that. So if you think about a cherry on top of a cupcake, that's the 3 to 5 needs that you or your child or any person is trying to meet on a very regular basis. So for some children, sensory needs are up there, right? If they have itchy labels, if they have socks that don't fit right, then for some kids, that is a cherry need. That is always right up there at the top. And if something about those isn't right, they cannot function in the world. When that need is met, they can function in the world. So yes, we're looking at things like sensory needs, at autonomy, at connection, food, rest, those kinds of things. So the top 3 to 5 needs are the cherry, and then there's the frosting layer underneath. And of course, I started out with an icing layer, which is very thin. In England, we use icing instead of frosting, but I was like, no, we need something a bit thicker than that. So we went with a thick layer of frosting underneath the cherry. And that's the 3 to 5 needs that are coming up, next most often for our particular child or for us. And then underneath that is sort of the cake, right? The rest of the cupcake is the rest of the potential needs that we could consider. And I think the critical part about this is when we are seeing resistance from our child, or when we're seeing our frustration, anger, resentment, we can think about our cupcake, which maybe we've had a chance to consider in advance, right? We don't need to wait for the next incident to happen. We can look back at the last time I felt those things, at the last time our child resisted us, and say, what need do I think was there? When my child makes decisions for themselves, does the rest of the day flow easier, right? Maybe autonomy is right there in that cherry. And then the next time I see resistance from my child, I'm not looking through a list of 50 things. I'm looking at, autonomy. Do they want to make this decision? How can I make that happen, right? How can I help them to make part of this decision that feels really meaningful to them? And then their resistance, which is so difficult for us to deal with, in large part because we used to resist when we were little and we were punished for doing that. So when our children resist us, it brings back all this, I want to support them and I want to be there for them and I want them to have full emotional expression, but I would have been punished for doing that when I was a kid. And so there's this massive tension going on in parents when they see this resistance from their children based on how the experiences they had with their parents when they were little, as well as based on their values, right? I believe in respectful parenting. I want to do this, but I just can't figure out how to make it happen because my role models didn't give me a model to follow. So it kind of helps us to get through that and to be able to say, okay, yes, I'm seeing a need for autonomy. How can my child have some more autonomy in the situation? And then our needs, again, which very often our cherry or frosting needs are for things like peace and ease and harmony and collaboration with our children.
And when you say the parent has to meet their own needs, I want you to clarify or say a few things about, we're not talking about our child meeting our need, right? We're talking about we have needs, we're responsible for our own needs, but it is not our child that we're looking at to meet our need.
Right. Not necessarily. Yes.
Not necessarily. Yes. Can you speak to this a little bit? Because then I don't want this to be confusing for someone. And again, resort to using strategies because they may say, my need is such and such. And now they are, again, turning to their child to sort of quote unquote meet their need. But again, they're resorting into the same conventional way of parenting.
Sure. Yeah. I think there are times when we can look to our child to help us meet our need. An example of that might be, I'm thinking back to a time when we were staying at a house where my daughter was jumping on the deck. There were these different colored planks of wood on the deck, and she wanted to see how far she could jump. And she set out some pebbles that she was using to measure how far she could jump. And so I said to her, I'm feeling worried right now because I have a need to make sure that you're safe. And so how can we make sure that you can have the fun that you're having, right? That she's looking for joy and play and movement are her needs. How can we meet your needs and meet my need for your safety as well? And she said, well, what if I I don't remember if she was using something else first and then she started using the pebbles, but I remember I was worried about her rolling her ankle on the pebbles. And so she said, well, then what if I move the pebbles to one side and use them as a measure on the side? Great, right? We found a way to meet my need for your safety and for your need to enjoy this. And I think the critical thing here is that my need was for her safety. If my need had been for quiet, for the work that I'm doing, then having her set the pebbles to the side wouldn't help me to meet my need, right? That's the strategy that wouldn't help me meet my need. Maybe her playing the same game down the garden would help me to meet that need. So it was really important that I understood what my need was in that case. And we were able to work together to find a way that met both of our needs. And then I don't feel any resistance, anger, resentment, frustration. And she is able to enjoy her game. So that's an example where I think we can look to our children to help us to meet our needs. But you're right. What we're not doing is we're not saying, you 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old are the person who is primarily responsible for helping me meet my needs. We have so many other opportunities to get our needs met. We have relationships with so many other people. We may have a significant other. We may have a parent that we can talk to, a friend, a therapist, right? If we have a need for connection and we're looking to our toddler as the primary person to fulfill that need for connection, that's putting more weight on the toddler than the toddler really should be bearing. So I think what's really important is to try to meet each other's needs to the extent that we aren't putting these inappropriate burdens on young children. And for also us to see that we do have other strategies that we can use to meet our needs that very young children don't, when we are the center of their universe, right? We are their primary support mechanism. So I hope that gets to the distinction that you're trying to make.
Yes, it does. And I truly love that example that you gave with your daughter playing with the pebbles and jumping. I think what I want to highlight, and maybe, for the listener to take away a tip, is in that moment, you didn't say, stop that, don't play, don't do that. That's a strategy, but you slowed down enough to tune in to your inner landscape just a little bit to say, what is my need here? Is it for quiet or for safety? And so you uncovered that it was safety. And how can you communicate that then to your child? Meanwhile, you heard what your child's need is in that moment, and you honor that. And oftentimes, what I want to highlight is that slowing down part is important instead of our impulsive reactive, don't do that, stop that, this catastrophic reactivity right away. I think that in and of itself would be very helpful for a lot of people to say, let me slow down. Why is this so important for me in this moment? Why do I want to say stop that? Is it because I care about her safety? Yeah. Then why am I not saying that explicitly to my child? That slowing down is key. And what happened was you found a way after you communicated from the needs, you use this language, a problem solving collaboratively takes place, which is wonderful. And oftentimes, we can meet both of our needs. Sometimes one of our needs may not be met, right? It's not always that situations end up being your need is met and your child's need is met, and wow, what a beautiful life, right? Can you speak about when that's not always the case, and what happens inside us when our need is not met or our child's need is not met?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So firstly, I just want to say a couple of words about what you said about the slowing down, which I think is super, super important. And it can be really hard, especially when, we're feeling overwhelmed, to create that pause. And the more that we can do that, the more that we can respond to our child based on our values instead of based on in the spur of the moment reaction. And I think that a lot of parents think, well, I've got to figure this out right now. I've got to make an instantaneous decision. And one thing I found really useful is to say to my child, my first reaction is to say no. And I don't want to say no without thinking about it. So I'm going to take a minute and think about it. And then I can say, I'm worried that X is going to happen, right? I'm worried you're going to roll your ankle. Or how can we make sure that X doesn't happen? How can we make sure you don't roll your ankle? So that then I am really getting clear on what is my need. And I'm inviting the child into the process of helping me to address my need. And there are obviously, 50 ways that we could have made this a game that she still enjoyed and that met my need for safety. I was not attached to any specific strategy there. I was open to a broad array of ways that she could play this game. And when I can open myself up in that way, then most of the time we can find a way that meets both of our needs. And I'm thinking about a flowchart that's in the book. I like flowcharts. I find them really helpful. And so there's a flowchart in the book that shows you, there's one on how to use the problem-solving process. There's another one on when to use the problem-solving process. And so it kind of walks you through, the main steps of doing that and focuses on the needs and says, most of the time we can find a way to meet both people's needs. There are going to be times when it doesn't happen, when we can't make it happen. And what do we do in those cases? Because this is not the only tool in our toolbox. And when we can't see a way to meet everybody's needs, the framework that I set up is, who does this primarily affect? Right? Does it primarily affect me? And so, for example, if I have had a busy day and I've cooked dinner and I've sat down and I'm ready for rest and nourishment, and my daughter says, I don't want the pink bowl, I want the green bowl. Right? What do I say? How do I respond? Am I noticing, a little frustration, a little anger, a little resentment coming up? Then if I see those things and I can't find a way to meet both of our needs, I might say, I'm going to set a boundary, right? I am not willing to go and get the other bowl. I'm not saying anything about her behavior. I'm not trying to change her behavior. She is welcome to go and get the other bowl if she would like to. But my boundary is I am not willing to get that bowl. If it's an issue where I can't say, I'm not willing to do this, right? So maybe, for example, my child's jumping on the couch and the couch is old and the springs are about to fail. I can't say, I don't want you to jump on the couch, because that's not a boundary. That's a limit, right? And we can set a limit. I think the challenge is that we tend to default to setting limits as our first tool, as our default strategy. And when we do that, we end up in a really combative relationship with our child because we haven't even considered what their need is. What we can do instead is to consider, I've tried looking at your need and I really can't see a way that we can both meet our needs. And so I'm going to ask you to stop doing that. right? I'm going to ask you or tell you to stop jumping on the couch. So boundaries and limits are the two tools for when I, as a parent, am the one that's most impacted. And then there are going to be times when our child is the one who's most impacted. So if they choose to go out in shorts and it's 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside, they may feel cold. That's a natural consequence. I haven't decided anything that's going to make them feel cold, right? If I make a decision, then that's a logical consequence, also known as a punishment. And so that might be something like, if we don't get teeth brushed by 8 o'clock, I'm not going to read stories, right? And the key there is the logical consequence / punishment has to be comparable in scope to the infraction and relatively soon after the infraction. You can't go to the party on Saturday because you're not brushing your teeth on Monday night is not appropriate in scope or in time. So we have these 4 other tools available to us, and the less often we use those and the more often that we're addressing both people's needs, the happier we're all going to be. But these tools are still there. Particularly boundaries are important to learn, to understand, to use, because we want our children to be able to use boundaries in a way that many of us never learned how to do.
And how does this affect the child? You gave a beautiful example of your daughter internalizing this, the way you parented her this way, with this mindset, with the shifts in this direction. And there was a story where your daughter about the blueberries. Can you share that story? I think that's a really wonderful illustration when children internalize this philosophy and they sort of guide us in the moment, even when we lose sight of things.
Yeah. And I think that, so the important part to that is, yes, our children start to take this on and they can guide us. And also parents with more than one child, they start to do it between themselves as well, right? So the story that you're thinking about is funny. I was actually in the middle of creating some slides for a workshop that I was teaching on these very concepts. And I was really busy and I felt overwhelmed. And I came out of the room where I was working, and I like to eat stewed apples with raisins and with cinnamon with my yogurt. Like that's sort of a warm.
What's stewed apples? Do you bake them?
Apples cut in small pieces and cooked in a pan. With a little bit of water. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And my daughter Kara says to me, "Can we have blueberries in the stewed apples?" And I'm thinking, blueberries and cinnamon? No, we can't. Right? My immediate response is no. And then she said something like, "Well, why not?" And so she's trying to understand my need, right? And I'm saying, "Well, because I think that blueberries and cinnamon are going to taste terrible together." And she said, "Oh, well, can you just pull out a portion of apples before you put the cinnamon in so that I can eat mine with blueberries and you can eat yours with cinnamon and no blueberries?" And yes, of course I can do that. Why didn't I think of that? Because my, window of tolerance was narrow and I didn't have access to all of my tools. And she has been doing this for long enough now that she knows how to identify somebody else's need and how to find strategies that meet both of our needs. And so when I do this work with parents with multiple kids, I'm remembering a particular parent who was just at their wits' end, can't go to the bathroom without, 5-year-old and a 3-year-old wailing on each other the whole time. And the parent starts using these tools with the 5-year-old. And then a few days later, the 5-year-old doesn't want to go to bed. And dad says, go to bed. And no. And, well, why don't you want to go to bed? Oh, actually, sorry, the 5-year-old says, Mama would ask me what my needs are. Why aren't you asking me what my needs are? Well, what are your needs? I'm worried I'm going to forget what color I want to draw with in my picture tomorrow. Oh, so I could write it down for you? Yeah. Okay. And then I'll go to bed. And then just a few days after that, the 5-year-old, the 3-year-old are playing. The 5-year-old is coloring. The 3-year-old comes running in and starts scribbling on the 5-year-old's paper. And of course, a few weeks earlier, that would have been instant meltdown for everybody. And the 5-year-old says to the 3-year-old, "Oh my goodness, are you feeling sad because we haven't had playtime yet today? Do you want to play for 5 minutes and then we'll come back and color next to each other?" And the 3-year-old's like, "Yeah." And they're doing this between themselves. And the parent doesn't have to referee every single interaction between them anymore because they understand how to find each other's needs and meet each other's needs. And it just makes everything in parenting so much easier.
Yeah. And the world will be a better place because of this one day, right? Because ultimately we're all trying to meet our needs, whether it's parenting or partner relationships, romantic relationship, workplace, anywhere. We're all driven by needs. And it will make the world a better place when we can see another human, not their position, not their strategy, but their need, which is, again, it's hard to see the needs to have this lens because of the capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy lens that we've been all indoctrinated in, this kind of what Yvette Erasmus says, domination culture. She's an NVC, nonviolent communication teacher, and I had her several times on my podcast. I love how she explains that domination culture.
Yeah, it really is.
And that's where it all comes from. You know, your child doesn't listen to you. We're not looking at the need, but making them listen to us. We're dominating them. And what is he learning, the child, as a result? And what is getting perpetuated through generations? What values, what ideas are we creating in the world? And so, yeah, I think if we could change that, we can change so much in the world.
I hope so. Yeah. And that's why I wrote the book, right? And if readers read it for, I just want parenting to be easier, that's okay. And if readers read it for, I have these values related to social justice and I want to live in greater alignment with my values, I want to raise children in that way, then, you know, so much the better. And that's really what it helps us to do, because I don't believe that these concepts of white supremacy, of patriarchy, of capitalism can really exist in a world where nobody dominates anybody else, right? Where everybody's need is seen with equal weight, where my need is seen as equal weight with yours, with my child's, with your child's, with everybody else's children as well. Then the old structures of domination, of power over, I hope we will be working to dismantle those as we are parenting our children in this way. So, yeah, so we'll be, instead of passing on that culture of domination to the next generation that we were raised in, instead we're passing on a healing culture. And of course, our children are going to go out into the world and interact with a whole bunch of people across their lives. Are they going to be able to help those people to see things in a different way, right, as well? And I give an example in the book of a parent, and she's I've had her on my podcast a couple times, and she's always expressed hesitation, like, I don't think you should be featuring me as an example of somebody who's doing it really well, because I mess up all the time. And she said what she's seen is that when she does this consistently, that even if it's not perfectly, right, just consistently, things shift in her interactions with her children. And one of her children noticed a kid at school who had just been diagnosed with ADHD and was being bullied by, you know, a big group of kids in the classroom. And previously, this child had been one of those in that group of kids and said, you know what, I'm not going to be in that group of kids anymore. I want to go and make friends with this kid. And so we start to see it ripple out into the ways our children have relationships with others, and it will continue to do so throughout their lives.
Yeah, making the world a kinder, more compassionate and peaceful place. That's my tagline for my podcast, my new tagline. So tell the listeners where they can find the book, how they can connect with you, and anything else you want to say.
Yeah. So listeners can find everything about the book at yourparentingmojo.com/book. And we've got lots of bonuses there when you order the book, when you order multiple copies. There's how-to videos. There's all kinds of cool stuff that you can get to help you put the ideas in the book into practice in your life with your child. And I'm also on a book tour, mostly focused in Colorado right now, also on the West Coast. And so there's links there to events that I'm doing. I'll be doing panel conversations with people who are also working in related areas, doing a lot of workshops at preschools and schools as well. So if you have a community group and you want me to come and share these ideas in a real workshop, right, in an experiential workshop, this is not me lecturing for a couple of hours. This is, how can I see how these forces have affected my life, and what do I actually do differently in the struggles I'm having with my child? Then I'm offering workshops there as well. And if you just want to dip a toe in the water, you just want to see what is likely my child's most important need, yourparentingmojo.com/quiz. There's the quiz there, and you can just get a sense for, oh yes, I'm guessing this is my child's need, when I can start to help them meet that need more often. probably it will loosen other things up and things will get easier.
Yeah. What have been the most three influential books, either parenting books or other books, on your own thinking and development, either about parenting or your approach or in general?
Gosh, I'm only allowed three.
You can say more, but like, what have been the three most influential books off the top of your head?
I read a lot, so that's how I process information. I'm estimating that I've probably read 10,000 books and academic articles for the podcast over the last 7 years. I mean, obviously finding nonviolent communication was really impactful. And so Marshall Rosenberg has the classic book there. If you search Marshall Rosenberg, nonviolent communication, you'll find it. Inbal Kashtan also has a really small, beautiful book, something like Parenting from the Heart, but there's another book that's similarly titled. So Parenting Heart, Inbal Kashtan, will get you to that. So those from an NVC-based perspective. I think Bell Hooks has actually inspired a lot of my thinking on patriarchy, on capitalism, and white supremacy. I'm still kind of digging deeper into her work, but she has definitely talked about that framework, and I find that a really useful way of approaching the topic. And then since the book was finished, obviously as someone with a well-developed case of imposter syndrome who really enjoys research, the worst thing that could happen is I stumble on an entire body of literature that refutes or, just kind of goes against what I say in the book. That would be absolutely terrifying and humiliating for me. And since I finished the book, I found two books, Moral Politics by George Lakoff and The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And both of them take slightly different lenses on the same thing, which is the idea of how our ideas about politics, right, conservatism, liberalism, reflected in the parenting choices that we make. Because obviously, you and I have values that are very aligned. There is a big swath of people in the US and in other places who think that white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism are the natural order of things, are the way that things should be. And that is reflected in the tools of domination that are used in their parenting style. And both Haidt and Lakoff argue that conservatives have been extremely successful at shaping the political discourse and at shaping parenting practices as a result of that. And really kind of going into that tension that liberal parents feel between these domination-based models that we were raised with and our values of care and for others and fairness. And so it was really lovely to find their work. I wish I could have found it before I finished the book and I would have referenced it, but to find it afterwards and just think, yes, this is what I meant. This is what I was talking about. So those, I think, would be some of the most influential books.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I wish you good luck with your workshops and live events, and the book tour sounds exhausting, but take care of yourself. I'm positive you have all the tools at this moment for self-care, and you can identify your needs for rest and restoration.
Getting better at it.
Burn out yourself. So congratulations. Thank you so much. I can't wait to get the physical book. I am excited for you. And I should have you back again to talk about what's like to discover that you have autism as a grown-up and growing up, losing your mom at age 11. How did that shape you? Because that's my favorite topic, as you may know, or you may not know, because I lost my mom when I was 13. So maybe we can talk about that. So thank you so much, Jen. It's always a pleasure. I really value our friendship. I wish we lived close by. We could have had coffee, walks, or things like that.
That's what book tours are for. I'll make it out there eventually. Thanks so much for having me on again, Anna. That was a lot of fun.